Ever find yourself staring into your pantry?
Mhm.
Or maybe at like a packed suitcase? And you're like, do I really need all this stuff?
Yeah,
Today's deep dive is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about essential versus superfluous.
we're about to challenge.
Yeah.
Um, some really deeply ingrained assumptions
Mm,
about,
yeah.
what it means to live a good life. And spoiler alert, it might not involve as many bedside tables as you think.
Okay, now you've got me really intrigued. We're diving into this 2023 research paper that really throws a wrench into traditional economic models like GDP.
Right, because GDP just measures how much we're producing and consuming, not whether those things are actually contributing to our well-being
Yeah.
or a sustainable future. This research tackles that head on.
So how do they measure something as slippery as essentiality?
Researchers went straight to the source, people's perceptions. They asked business students in two very different locations, Birmingham in the UK and Porto Alegre, Brazil, to classify 81 products as essential or superfluous, everything from fruit juice to electronics.
A transatlantic essentiality showdown. I'm already sensing some cultural clashes brewing.
You're spot on. One of the first things that jumped out was just how differently these groups viewed certain everyday items.
All right, spill the tea. Give me an example. What sparked this essentiality debate?
Let's talk fruit juice. In Brazil, men were more likely to consider it essential, while women were less convinced. But flip the script to the UK, and you find the complete opposite. British women were more likely to deem it essential.
Whoa, that's a head scratcher. What's going on there? Does fruit juice have a different cultural significance in these places?
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Perhaps it's tied to perceptions of health, or maybe even social status. Further research would be needed to unpack those nuances, but
Yeah.
it highlights just how much our cultural backgrounds can shape our understanding of needs and wants.
And this wasn't just a one-off fruit juice phenomenon, was it?
Not at all. This pattern,
Mm.
these opposing viewpoints,
Hmm.
uh, emerged across a number of products, particularly when we look at the bigger picture of all food and drink items.
So what was different about food and drink?
Well, here's a real head scratcher. It was the only like category where Brazilians on average actually found items more essential than the folks over in the UK.
That's really interesting. I wonder if affordability could be playing a role there. Maybe in a place like Brazil, where income levels are generally lower, those basic necessities take on an even greater sense of urgency.
You're thinking like a true social scientist.
Right.
And the researchers suggest that economic realities are likely a key part of it. Our circumstances can really impact what we prioritize.
Okay, this is all fascinating, but I have to ask, how do you go from these individual product comparisons to a bigger understanding of someone's relationship with essentiality?
That's where things get really visually compelling. The researchers developed what they call essentiality profiles. Imagine a spectrum with absolutely essential on one end and totally superfluous on the other.
Okay, picture this essentiality spectrum. You've got the essentials like food and water on one end, and then
Yeah,
diamond-encrusted back scratchers on the other.
you're not far off. The researchers actually plotted all 81 products onto this spectrum. Based on how those students ranked them, it gives you this fascinating visual snapshot of their priorities, kind of like a fingerprint, but for your consumption values.
I'm really curious to see what these fingerprints reveal. Did the UK and Brazil line up, or were there some major differences in their essentiality profiles?
Buckle up, because it's a pretty stark contrast. The UK overall leaned much more heavily towards the essential end of the spectrum, even for things that most would consider wants, not needs.
So even their superfluous category was more essential. I'm starting to think those Brits might be onto something. Maybe they've got a different definition of comfort and convenience. Speaking of which, the study did look at comfort items, right? What were some of the differences there?
One that stands out is the humble bedside table in the UK. A good chunk of those students considered it essential. But for Brazilians, not so much.
See, this is why I love this study. It reveals these seemingly small things that we'd never think twice about, but they speak volumes about our cultural norms and expectations.
Exactly. It reminds us that there's no universal definition of need or want.
Mm.
A lot of it is shaped by the world around us.
It makes you wonder, though, how much of this is about our upbringing versus the economic realities of the place we live. I mean, those students in Brazil might have different perspectives if they were living in, say, Norway.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It highlights how intertwined our cultural values and economic circumstances can be.
It also makes me think about how individual life experiences factor in. I bet if we surveyed a group of retirees, their essentiality profiles would look quite different from those business students.
Absolutely. What we consider essential is constantly evolving alongside our own lives. Think about it. A 20-year-old student is going to have a very different set of priorities than someone who's retired and living on a fixed income.
It's like when I got my first apartment take. Suddenly a washing machine and a decent coffee maker became non-negotiables.
Speaking of non-negotiables, the study also touched on how economic uncertainty can impact our perceptions of essentiality, didn't it? Like during those scary times when the economy takes a nosedive. It sure did. The research suggests that when times get tough, people naturally become more attuned to those core necessities, those things we truly need to survive and thrive. We saw this play out during the recent pandemic,
Yeah.
where suddenly things like hand sanitizer and toilet paper topped everyone's shopping lists.
It's almost like our survival instincts kick in. And we're less concerned with keeping up with the Joneses and more focused on putting food on the table and making sure our loved ones are safe and sound.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that our values and priorities are not set in stone. They can shift and adapt based on our circumstances.
This is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to ask, how in the world do you measure something as subjective as essentiality? It's not like we can just whip out a ruler and say, okay, this bedside table is 7.5 essentiality units.
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
But the researchers came up with a clever method. Remember those essentiality profiles we talked about? They assign numerical values to each product based on how often the students classified it as essential.
So the more students who rated a product as essential, the higher its essentiality score.
Precisely.
Clever. It's like they found a way to measure the intangible.
It allowed them to create those visual profiles we talked about, showing the relative importance of different products and how those perceptions vary across cultures.
This is also eye-opening, but
Yeah.
I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Don't we all have slightly different ideas of what essential even means?
Yeah.
Couldn't that skew the results?
That's a really insightful point, and it's something the researchers acknowledged. There's no escaping the fact that there's a personal subjective element to all of this. What one person considers absolutely essential, another might see as completely unnecessary. And that's perfectly fine.
So it's not about creating some rigid definition of essentiality that we should all follow.
Exactly. It's more about prompting us to think critically about our own consumption habits and what truly adds value to our lives. You know, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy the latest and greatest everything. But this research reminds us to take a step back and ask ourselves, do I really need this? Or am I just chasing after something fleeting?
It's like finding that inner BS detector for the consumerist world. But let's be honest, even when we know we don't need something, it can be hard to resist those tempting marketing messages.
You're preaching to the choir. It takes conscious effort to resist those impulses and stay true to our values. But I think this research can be a powerful tool for navigating that tricky terrain.
It's like that saying, knowledge is power. By understanding how our perceptions are shaped, by culture economics, even our own life stories, we can make more mindful choices about what we buy and use. We can break free from that keeping up with the Joneses mentality.
Exactly. It's about aligning our spending with our values. Speaking of which, this research has some fascinating implications, not just for us as individuals, but also for businesses.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine companies using this essentiality lens when they're designing products. Instead of churning out more single-use gadgets that end up in landfills, they could prioritize creating things that people truly need and value, things that are built to last.
That's the idea behind sustainable, frugal innovation, a concept the paper highlights. It's about focusing on functionality, durability, and affordability over fleeting trends and planned obsolescence.
It's like shifting from a mindset of more is more to less but better. And who knows, maybe this focus on essential products could even lead to a more equitable and sustainable future, where resources are used more wisely and everyone has access to the things they truly need.
That's the dream, isn't it? And it starts with asking those tough questions about what really matters, both for ourselves and the planet.
This deep dive has given us so much to ponder. Who knew fruit juice could spark such fascinating conversations about cultural differences and consumption habits?
It's been a wild ride. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. We've explored those essentiality profiles from people across the globe. But what would yours look like? What truly matters most in your life?
What a great question to ponder. So listeners, take a moment to reflect on your own essentiality profile. What would be on it? What might surprise you? Let's keep this conversation going. Head over to our website or social media pages and share your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.